Hi everyone, this is Miss Effler. I'm just here because I wanted to check in and talk a little bit about the feedback you should have gotten today on your rough draft. So this presentation is entitled, So You Have Feedback on Your Rough Draft. Now what? Just to review before we get started, we have about a 5 or maybe 6-step writing process in this class. So we plan the essay, we look at the assignment, you read a number of different examples, and then hopefully you thought about a topic. Then you had to write a draft where you actually had to sit down and write the essay. And now we're in this revision stage where you're looking at the essay with a new vision. We're making global changes, thinking about things like organization, how is my introduction, how is my conclusion, how is my paragraph structure. And we kind of have two pieces to revision. We can revise ourselves by going through the essay, looking for big changes, making sure the ideas that we're trying to convey are in there. And then we also have peer revision, which is getting feedback from a peer. And in college, we think about your professor, your instructor as being a peer because you're all people working on these same kind of ideas to try to get the ideas across to other people. And so when you receive instructor feedback, that's part of peer revision. You can also have another student in your class, look at the assignment for further peer revision as well. After revision, we have editing, and I like to separate these two processes out because editing is sentence level changes. Instead of global paper changes, it's local changes, looking at the paper sentence by sentence to make sure not that the ideas are okay, that's what we're doing in revision, and we want to make sure our ideas are okay first, but then we go to editing and we make sure that the ideas in the essay actually make sense and use proper English, and so we're looking for editing. And then finally, we have publishing, where you're meeting due dates and formatting the paper correctly. I like to separate revision and editing because you will get a lot of feedback on your paper, but some of it is focused on making those global changes, and some of it is focused on helping you with things like punctuation, word choice, sentence structure. And so if you can go through your feedback first and kind of think about highlight, or maybe if you can print out your paper, circle the things that are these global changes that are revision and work on those first, getting a lot of extensive feedback sort of seems a little less intimidating. I did mention too that sometimes we have a 6-step writing process, and in between drafting and revision, sometimes I like to take a break. And that needs to kind of happen in order to look at the essay with a new vision. And hopefully you kind of took a break from the essay while you were waiting for feedback from me, so that now you are kind of looking at it with some fresh eyes for that revision process. While these steps in our writing process logically progress, right? I can't draft something unless I've planned it, and I certainly can't revise or edit something unless I've actually written it. We also say that the writing process is recursive, and that means that maybe when I'm in revision, I might start thinking about, well, I'm missing this whole piece of my narrative story. So maybe I need to go back to drafting to draft that section and then kind of switch back to revision. So we can kind of jump back into other pieces of the process. And that's why publishing, I think, is a really important piece. It might kind of seem easy. You guys have already nailed it in formatting your papers correctly. But having those due dates gives us a goal and a timeline so that we don't get kind of stuck in the endless process of revision and editing forever. The first piece of feedback that you should note is the rubric. Now you will notice that if you submitted a rough draft and it was a complete story, that you had a whole story, that you completed the assignment, even if it wasn't the full word count, that you probably got full credit. But if you go back to the rubric, you'll probably notice that there are areas where you were successful or sufficient, or areas that needed revision and editing. And those are checked on your rubric so that you can focus on those specific aspects. Now, if you're looking at the rubric criteria, we're looking at a number of different pieces. And some of them you might say, well, this is really more editing and this is maybe even more publishing. And so I'm not going to worry about it till I kind of get there in my writing process. And that's totally fine. It's just trying to help you identify those. So it kind of goes through the formatting. Well, that you might not worry about that until you get to publishing. But it also talks about organization, an effective introduction, focusing your thesis, paragraphs, transitions, sentences, your conclusion, and then grammar and mechanics. And again, you might be able to parse out and say, well, I know my grammar and mechanics weren't great because I was just kind of using the language I'm comfortable talking to people in, and I know that's not really appropriate academic language. And so I'm going to fix that when I get to editing. But maybe kind of trying to figure out, oh yeah, my paragraphs need a little work. That would be something that I should work on during this kind of revision stage to make sure, again, that my ideas are where I want them to be. You will notice too that on our Blackboard site, there is a new section under writing handbooks, and that's a rubric guide. And so when you are looking at the rubric and maybe you need a little help with paragraphs, you can click these two links for more information about paragraphs. So you kind of don't have to go through your paper to kind of get the in-text feedback from the instructor to figure out how to fix these things. If you're looking at the rubric, you can use that rubric guide to look at those specific links, to look at handouts from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, or from Purdue University's online writing lab. So you can figure out those concepts and ideas by looking at that rubric. Apart from the rubric, you also should see a lot of in-text feedback. And I like this picture here because it's the instructor and the student having a conversation. And that's what I'm doing with the text. When you critically read a text, you should be having a conversation with it. And when I'm critically reading your papers, I'm having a conversation with them. So there's 3 types of feedback. We've got smiley faces, general comments, and then links. Smiley faces are my favorite. Now, I will tell you in the rough drafts, because I am providing so much feedback, I don't use them as much as maybe I do in other assignments. But smiley faces mean that I'm having a conversation with your text and I like something that you wrote. Maybe it's really connected to what we're talking about in class. Maybe it's a really great sentence. Maybe it's a cool idea. I liked it, so I put a smiley face next to it, and I probably wrote some kind of comment about why it gets a smiley face. All right, so look for those if you're feeling a little overwhelmed with all of the work that you need to do. Go back to those smiley faces and think about what you did really well and see how you can continue that through your paper. Apart from those smiley face comments, you'll also just be getting general comments about your paper. Now, a lot of them are going to be specific to your essay and focus on making some of those global changes. Some of them are going to deal with editing issues. Common comments that deal with editing, I might ask you, who is you? I'm trying to help you avoid second person. We try to avoid second person because it makes assumptions about the reader. And in avoiding second person, asking who is the you in the context of the sentence makes you think about who are you actually addressing when you say you. And so you might see kind of that funny question there where I'm asking you to do that. I'm asking you to think about who are you actually addressing when you say you. And a lot of times in these narratives, it's probably actually I. You are talking about I, the person you're writing about. I might also tell you to avoid the words thing and stuff and use more specific vocabulary. Think about what you mean when you actually say thing. The definition of thing is really hard to nail down. And so I need you to be specific in your writing so that your reader knows what you're trying to say. I might also tell you to avoid deadwood phrases. Deadwood phrases are phrases that we use in polite conversation to kind of open up ourselves to other people's ideas. They're phrases like I think, I believe, I feel like, and those phrases where you can certainly talk about how you were feeling in your narrative, those phrases are not necessary to the meaning of the sentence. They're really polite and pleasant conversationally. If I say, I think vanilla is the best ice cream flavor, and then that gives you an opportunity in our conversation to respond with your thoughts on vanilla and maybe what your favorite ice cream flavor is. In a paper, though, I would just say vanilla is the best ice cream flavor, because then I have the rest of the paper to explain why that is so, to make that point into kind of a fact there. You might also see the word versus or the abbreviation versus in between two words, and that means that I want you to look up the definition of those two words, because maybe you have one in your sentence and it sounds similar to another word, or maybe you made a spelling typo, and I just want to make sure that you understand the definition of the word so that you choose the correct word for your sentence. Those common comments definitely deal with more editing type stuff, but again, you'll see general comments from me to help with revision that are specific to your particular essay. Apart from comments, you'll also see links. I will link you to information from Purdue's online writing lab and the Writing Center at the University of North Carolina. I have a link here to the owl in my PowerPoint presentation, and if I click on it, this is just an example, it takes me to the quick comma rules. And while the quick comma rules worksheet will give me a lot of insight into commas and how to use them, there's also, let me close this window, there's also this really great table of contents so that I can look at extended rules for commas, commas after introductions, commas versus semicolons. So this is way more comprehensive information than I could give you in a little feedback box on your paper, and it will really help you kind of learn a concept. Especially if you notice that you have a lot of comma feedback, you might want to play around and look at this a little bit more closely. Similarly, UNC Chapel Hill's Writing Center has these really nicely done extensive worksheets on topics like paragraphs. If you see a UNC Chapel Hill link, it's probably something more related to revision. The owl, that's sort of those grammar, punctuation type issues. So you could kind of save some of those for editing as well. The final point that I want to make about instructor feedback is that you should feel free to ask questions. Now remember, I was having a conversation with your paper, and so now you're trying to figure out what the conversation I was having was so that you can make your paper better. So if something's unclear, feel free to ask me. You can also ask me if something that you fixed is now more correct. I'm happy to take any of those questions via email. I just can't review your paper one more time. Now it's up to you to do that revision, that editing, to make your paper the best that it possibly can be.